Welcome to the Homeschool Together podcast. Where one working mom and a stay-at-home dad help you navigate the nuts and bolts of the growing and dynamic world of homeschooling.
With a focus on early learners, like me.
All the ins and outs of building and maintaining your homeschool life.
Homeschool.
Find out tips and tricks to make things like this easier.
I'm reading.
And ultimately, enjoy educating your kids. And what's that last thing?
Have fun together. Did I do good, Daddy?
Yeah, you did, sweetie. Good job. Hello and welcome back to Homeschool Together. Thank you for joining us. And going with the theme of the podcast today, I'm going to test you and your abilities to go down and click on something and subscribe and say hello and do all the fun little things. Maybe leaving us a review on iTunes. That would be super helpful as well. Today we are going to be starting an ongoing series for maybe the next few weeks about testing and testing in general. And we understand that some families don't do testing or don't believe in testing and whatnot, and that's totally cool. We're going to be talking about a lot of the pros of testing and where you may want to use it, some of the reasons to do it. But by no means are we advocating that you should be doing this. Obviously, we always say with homeschooling, do what is best for you and your learners in your homeschool. But we are going to be talking a lot about testing over the next couple of weeks. So if that interests you, or maybe even tangentially interests you, hopefully we'll give you a few words of ideas and nuggets of wisdom, and maybe ways that you can apply testing in different ways. I mean, I think we're going to see over the next couple of weeks when we're going to talk about testing. It doesn't always have to be the multiple choice 50-point, 50 question thing and whatnot. We can do assessments and testing in many different ways, and that's going to be kind of the thing that we're going to be talking about.
Yeah, so I want to kind of stop you right there because
Don't
you just
stop me. I'm on a roll, Ariel.
Don't stop me now. Okay, so what I want to say.
We're having a good time. Having a good time. Here we go. Homeschool fast.
Okay. I didn't mean to. I regret this. Bad decision.
Oh, you had me going. You spun up the queen.
So you said assessments. You said tests in the same sentence.
Exactly.
Can you give me a quick, what is the difference in your mind between a test and an assessment?
The test and assessment are two circles in a Venn diagram. If we want to talk about Venn diagrams.
I love a good Venn diagram.
Good Venn diagram. They overlap each other heavily. So you can have somebody say, I'm going to give you an assessment, and that would be indistinguishable from a quiz or something. A test, I think, is typically more in the lines of, like, if you're thinking about traditional schooling, that would be, when we think test, we think a summative assessment. And they typically use the term summative assessment is what we would typically think as a test. So that's something at the end of a unit. A unit could be a series of 10 lessons that are teaching some overarching theme or concept. Each lesson is doing a number of things, and then there'd be a kind of a summative assessment that teaches on the back of what you've been doing over a stretch of time, or it can also be something done at the end of a year that is kind of summative either over the semester or the quarter, and that's where they would use the term summative assessment and test kind of interchangeable with how a lot of us would think what a test would be defined as.
So in progress assessments, though, are more meant to gauge where your learner is at towards the material. So
exactly
to give a kind of a cool analogy to what we do in medical device development, we have what we call formative assessments and the summative assessment, which is a validation. So
it's funny how the terminologies cross industries like that.
Right. So this basically means that the device that we have made is something that the user can actually use with the intention. So we make ultrasound. So it's, what can the user actually use this ultrasound system the way that we intended? So as we go along through the development, we have these formative assessments. And in each assessment, what we're looking to do is see if assess a part of the product, whether it's the user interface on the product, whether it's the what they're physically going to hold, the ultrasound probe that they're going to hold, and how does that feel, or button placement. We're looking for certain pieces of the whole, and to get their feedback and see, like, how far along are we on that feature, that, like, let's say that button set, and do we need to make adjustments to it, because by the time we get to the summative, we want to make sure that this user can use the device exactly as we intend. So to bring it back to homeschool, it would be you're assessing your student along the way to see how they're coming along, how they're progressing towards understanding this body of knowledge, which might mean that you as an educator are going to maybe change tactics, or maybe you're going to review something or approach something from a different direction, whatever. Whereas the test at the end is, meant to test, did they get this whole body of knowledge that I wanted? And
you can I think of it even bifurcates a little bit more in the idea of qualitative assessment versus quantitative assessment. So you'll tend to get more quantitative assessments in things that can be calculated, or, yes or no, correct or wrong answers. Qualitative would be more of like, how do you evaluate this person's writing, or how did they do on a presentation, or how is this group of children working together, and are they asking the same right questions? Are they communicating? That's something that it's hard to say that there's a right and wrong answer in those types of things. So your assessments can be split there as well. And then that sets into, well, what type of assessments are you doing in that? And you're absolutely right. What you said with the benchmarking and understanding where you are and where you need to go, all through the learning, assessments are there to help gauge where your learner is, where gaps or opportunities of growth is the technical term, that they may have on things that they need to be working on. And it can then help, as you said, gauge where you go from there. And in the school, this happens number of ways. It can inform the teacher of the student's situation, but it can also inform the teacher of the lesson quality. Like, how good did they do on the lesson? How good did they do on presenting that information? And do they need to go back and maybe tweak it, do it again, or maybe change tactics on how they're teaching it? Maybe direct instruction wasn't very good for this topic. Maybe it would be better having group discussion. We talked about a week or two ago about the 3D printing, where you can sit there and have somebody, print something, but sitting there on a 3D tool, working for a couple hours to design the thing that they're making, performing some measurements, making those changes in the tool, printing it, and then testing it. That whole action of learning, of like testing and performing it, may be a better way of learning how to do that, as opposed to just sitting here saying, okay, now you click on this, then you click on this, then you click on this. Okay, you got it? Oh yeah. Certain subjects benefit from direct instruction, some benefit from group instruction. So using assessments can help gauge what method you may want to use and where you may want to go forward. So it can be not as much of a, okay, I'm going to sit you down and have you take a test. The assessments can help inform you as a homeschool parent on what your next steps would be. Like, if I know I went through a lot of this when I was doing the reading with my oldest, I would be working for a couple weeks, constantly testing her along the way, not in an overt way where like, here's a quiz and here's what you're doing. Just constant assessment, which can manifest in just, what a lesson was doing. Like, here's a couple cards. Hey, can you check and tell me what this is? What is this? Can you read this sentence? As the student is doing those activities, it's essentially an ongoing assessment. And you're sitting there saying, well, I've been doing this for a couple of weeks and I'm seeing no improvement. Okay, because I've been doing this continuous assessment methodology, and it's not like a quiz or a test, but it's just me assessing what they're doing through little actions and whatnot. Sometimes they have this terminology called like an exit ticket or things like that where the teacher will say, okay, we've taught you this concept. Here's a little quiz, maybe a 1 or 2 question quiz, and let me know if you got it right. We do this all the time as homeschoolers when we are engaged in the education, especially with our early learners. We are constantly assessing them. We're testing them on this word, or testing them on this math concept or this problem. Okay, you did really good on adding these fractions. Here's another question. Can you add this together? And the kid goes ahead and does that. Right. That is essentially an assessment, or
even though it's not really formalized into a main test. And
they call it informal assessments.
Right. And I just wanted us kind of upfront before we start a 4-part series about testing to say that we're going to use the term test
and assessment.
Whereas some of these, you kind of go the gamut, right? Between all the way from informal assessments all the way to the SATs, right? And there's this whole level, the spectrum of testing. where we're kind of targeting the series is more about, a formalized test that you have to take because we're getting ready for state testing here. And I know a lot of you out there have to do some formalized testing. So that's kind of where we're aiming this to. But just keep in your mind that some of this stuff may also apply to assessments that you would do in your home that aren't outside testing. And we'll kind of try to highlight where we think that some of the material also crosses over. But just so that that's kind of where we're framing. But many of these techniques could be helpful for your assessments that you're doing, whether it's an informal one, like you say, where your student's working through a math problem and you make up another one on the spot to see how they're doing, or, to kind of give them a small quiz, or whether it's like a formal assessment at the end of Math Mammoth or Right Start or one of your other curriculums. So there is a spectrum here. We're going to be talking more about getting ready and preparing for formalized testing, but just keep your mind open to which things might also apply to your assessments, at home.
Well, and a lot of us also have to track progress, whether we're reporting to the state or if the state is asking us to track progress, but not have to report that. And that's a thing here in Washington that we have to do.
We have to assess.
And then later in life, I think we had an interview. I'll go dig that up, where we interviewed the Homeschool Mom blogger, and she talked about how at the end, maybe if you go through high school, we are having to build transcripts, and how do you prove that along the way, and tracking assessments and maybe a little bit more formalized than we're used to is a way to do that. And that's, I think, an important concept that maybe we want to just keep in the back of our mind if we're having to build transcripts and things of that nature.
Right. Some form of testing, whether you're going to eventually take an ACT or an SAT, whether it's fourth grade state testing or whatever you need to do. We just kind of wanted to, formal tests are not something that we typically do a lot of them. So we wanted to talk about kind of at the beginning, why test, right? A lot of homeschoolers have the option, like in our state, we have the option to test whichever way we kind of see fit, right? We can go to different testing outlets. At our parent partnership, testing is optional because we're technically public school students, even though we only go for enrichment classes. We don't have to do the state testing. Now, we are going to have our daughter perform the state testing. And in fact, our youngest is going to be doing an online testing that's not state, but it is administered by the school. And we're electing to do that. And I know a lot of homeschoolers feel some trepidation about doing formalized testing, but I think that it has a lot of benefits.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about, why testing matters. We've got that kind of long preamble out of the way.
Which I think is important.
Because we know testing,
we got to set the stage.
Testing is contentious, and some students don't do well with it. I know a lot of friends who do not do well with testing, and that's a hindrance, and we understand we want to be accommodating to that.
Right. And we don't want to stress our kids out either.
We don't want to stress them out either, but they do, in some respects, they do kind of need to know how to do these types of things. The first thing would be to measure academic progress. I think that's probably the most obvious reason.
Right.
And if you are lucky enough to have curriculums that have built-in testing with it, it makes life a lot easier. I know All About Reading does not have built-in academic tests, but they kind of have it structured within the lessons where you're constantly assessing along the way. But we use, say, like a Right Start Math. Every, 30 or 40 lessons, there's maybe a little less than that, maybe 20, 25 lessons, they have a formal assessment it's indistinguishable from a test, like a math test.
Right.
And they actually have a review assessment, especially when they get to the higher levels. I did notice this in the first two levels, but the last 3 or 4 levels that we've been doing, they have what is known as a review assessment where you can work together. The two are indistinguishable. They look the same. They're just different problems. And then there's a formal assessment. And so I like to use that as like kind of a training ground, like a pre-assessment. Okay, I want to see where you are. Oh, you have some gaps. Let's not take the assessment right now. Let's close those gaps. And then let me go ahead and give you that assessment and test you that. Kind of funny is in my master's program through my college that I'm at, they actually do exactly this. They give you a pre-assessment, which after like taking 10 or 12 of these tests online, the pre-assessments are indistinguishable from the actual assessment. They're different questions, but the class of the questions, the topics that are covered are all very similar. And I get to take that. I get whether I pass or I fail doesn't really matter. They give me a report on it, and then I can go then spend time closing those gaps. And they even tell me where in the course materials that I need to close those gaps. Once I close those gaps, I can then go ahead and take and schedule that test and go ahead and do that.
Yeah.
And I like that pattern because it takes a lot of the pressure off. Because I say, okay, I can take this practice test and know where I am, and then I can go ahead and fix those gaps or whatever that might be, and then go ahead and take that test. It makes the test a lot more comfortable for me. So I really like this idea of using it to assess your knowledge and assess where the state is of your learner.
Yeah, exactly. We can take a look at the gaps. It really gives us, especially if we do some sort of formalized test, it's a real unbiased assessment of where our kids are at, which helps us to understand if we need to provide more resources. It also really prepares our students for future challenges that they're going to have. We cannot avoid testing completely. There's going to be, at some point, our kids are going to have to do some sort of standardized test, whether it's to get into college or to get a GED, or whether they're going to a trade school. There's going to be tests someday, right? I think it would be unrealistic for us to avoid them entirely. So we're going to have to try to prepare them.
Even in the private entity world, like you're talking about, you guys run tests on your products. We used to have huge regression tests on our software and our hardware platforms. There are many industries that have checklists and tests and assessments that they have to do as part of their day-to-day work. You may have to have a presentation that you have to do at the end of whatever you're doing.
Many professional certifications. I had to take a professional certification for project management, right? That was a whole big test that I had to take. And
there's no way we're going to avoid altogether testing,
And so this helps our students really to become familiar with what an exam environment's like, and they can develop some test-taking strategies. I'm liking this a little bit to... Like, I never went to the dentist as a kid. I didn't go until I was like a teenager. I went like once, and then I went again when I had health insurance after I graduated college. And I still have a lot of dental anxiety as an adult. It's not well-founded because I didn't have major dental problems, but because I didn't go regularly, you started going as like an infant to the dentist, and you always went every 6 months and had your teeth cleaning. And going to the dentist for you might as well go to the grocery store. Like, you couldn't care less.
Even after I lost my teeth in high school.
Right. Even after you had bridge work and all kinds of stuff. And going to the dentist.
Sports related.
Yes. Going to the dentist does not scare you.
No,
But I have a lot of dental anxiety because of the unfamiliar. And test taking can be really stressful. So I think it's great to help prepare our kids for, we have to, of course, be sensitive to our own children. And, we did try to test with our older daughter a couple of years ago, and it actually absolutely was a horrible experience. It was a progressive test, so it kept getting harder as she answered things correctly. And it didn't stop. So eventually she was like in middle school math and in tears. It was a horrible situation. So choose your tests carefully, but and know the limits of your student and how they're going to feel. But, giving them appropriate levels of challenge and kind of, as they get older, ramp that up through the years, it helps to prepare them for later.
100%. And I like this idea of preparation because that kind of goes right into the next idea, which is setting goals and tracking improvement.
Yeah.
One of the biggest things in my degree when they talk about assessment, there's all these aspects that assessment provides to a teacher when you're assessing the class or the student. The other factor of it is it helps give you data, and that data can then be used to track whether or not you're doing well, and it also helps you set those goals and allows you to essentially track that improvement over time. And this is a great way for us as homeschoolers is to gather that type of data, know that our students are doing well, and understanding, okay, is my instruction correct? Is the curriculum working in the way it should? Is my learner connecting with this material? And can I, should I move forward with this, or should I make pivots and changes?
Right.
With the reading curriculum and the struggles we had with reading early on, I felt like I was literally throwing everything in the kitchen sink at my daughter, and it just turned out to be time was the problem. I just needed to give it more time. But I really did feel like, okay, I'm tracking what I'm doing. Okay, this didn't work. She doesn't seem to be responding to this. Let's try this other thing.
Well, now she's tracking her reading speed for a page of text.
Yeah, we're doing fluency tracking as well.
And so that has been really helpful because she's seeing how much faster she's getting. Not that we're trying to get her to speed read, but if she reads too slowly, she's forgetting the beginning of the sentence by the time she got to the end of the sentence.
Yeah, right.
So she has to read with enough fluency to be able to understand the whole thought.
And fluency being speed and accuracy together.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think it's really great. I mean, I remember taking my SAT when I was a teenager, and I didn't quite hit the mark of the score that I wanted. And I had to make a complete test training plan for myself that I could then, and then I was, taking practice tests, and I was benchmarking myself and like, okay, these are my areas. And it really helped to motivate me. I spent an entire summer preparing for it. And then I got the score that I needed to get to get the scholarship that I wanted. So, I mean, I think that there is a lot of goodness towards, having a goal and then seeing it achieved through testing, right? And repeated testing.
Another benefit we see with testing is this idea that you get a sense of achievement and confidence, especially when
absolutely
a student does well or they can achieve some goal.
Right. They have evidence that they did.
Coming in off the goals and setting those goals. And if you all of a sudden at the end of that time period, like what you said with your SAT scores, if you're able to set those goals, do the work at the end, do well, and then you get the achievement, there's a lot of feedback in there that helps you become more confident in who you are, understanding that the process works and that the process is beneficial. So that if I put the work in, if I put the hard effort in, I can achieve these results. I can get the goals that I want or achieve the things I'm desiring. There is a feedback mechanism that gives you more confidence to move forward.
Absolutely. Whenever you do one of the Math Mammoth or Right Start tests with our daughter, she always asks you to score it. Yep. Right? Because we were really big about like, hey, we're not going to put grades on things. We just want to know where you're at, no pressure.
It is very funny that we are in a homeschool that does not push grades. We do not push the scores. When I coach sports, I always tell my daughter, listen, it doesn't matter whether you win or lose. It only matters that we played hard and we played as a team and we did the best we can, because anytime you go out into the world, whether it's academics or athletics or in any personal environment, there's always going to be a better player. There's always going to be a better team. There's always going to be someone smarter, someone stronger. Because the statistics is you're not that number one person. Just the statistics is not the case. So don't go into a situation expecting you're going to be the number one person.
Right. You can't only be satisfied with being the best. You have to be satisfied with other things.
For most of us, we have to do the best we can with what we have and achieve the most we can. And that's what I always tell those girls. It doesn't matter what the score is. It matters whether you played hard and you did it as a team and you did the right way.
Right.
And you played well and you played with good sportsmanship and all that type of stuff.
Yeah.
And for us, it's not necessarily being like the number one person, and we don't want to always try to think like the score.
Right.
But the funny thing is the minute they get into these things, they start asking, well, what's my score? And we were playing basketball like last year. They didn't keep the score. They just kept the time.
Right.
The kids would come to me and go, did we win? I'm like, well, guys, we're not keeping score. They're like, yeah, I understand that.
But what was the score?
But what was the score?
Right. They do really want to know. And I think
it's almost like it's something internal. Like they know they're competing. Right.
Right. And even when our daughter takes a math test, she comes to me when I get home and she's like, Mom, I got a 98 on this. And the one that I missed 2 points on, I already studied it and I know what I need to do now. And she feels such a sense of accomplishment and pride in what she's doing. And, when tests don't go well, and that has happened before too, then that's something that you work on with her. And then she is really proud when she does achieve the score, when she retests on that material after she's relearned it and, we've figured out what the challenges were. So I think the sense of achievement and confidence is a really big deal.
And if we, even just wrinkle on that, remember assessment, there were a lot of different types of assessments that we all took in high school. Not all of them were just sit down essays or sit down tests. Sometimes it was a presentation. There are different ways to assess.
That's totally true.
And one of them could be, oh, my daughter is going to the concert and she gets to sing in front of 400 students like she did last year.
Right.
That is an assessment in my book, and that is a scary assessment that most of us would not be able to handle.
Yeah, I wouldn't be
You did a concert at the end of the year and you did great. That's a final assessment. Great job. Right? There are different ways to assess. When she goes and does a presentation, or she does a something at like the Girl Scouts, or she builds something or whatnot and shows us what she's doing. These are all assessments where she is performing this and she is, passing or failing and that type of stuff. And it's,
not everything has a pass or fail, I guess.
It doesn't always have to pass or fail.
But we're really hesitant to we're always encouraging, of course.
Yeah, of course.
But especially when there's scores involved, she's like, oh, is that a good score? Is that what I would expect to get? And so it can be a real challenge, especially, I think you're right. There are other kinds of assessments, and those assessments are very subjective.
Yeah.
So subjective assessments, I think, are really difficult because she's like, she performed in a talent show and she did dancing in a talent show. And she's like, how did that do compared with everybody else? And I'm like, well, you're my daughter, so I think it was wonderful. And I know you worked really hard on it. And I think everyone really enjoyed it. So that's the kind of feedback that I give.
Yeah.
It's not like, well, you passed or you failed or you were the best or the worst or in the middle or, like I don't.
In a school, they would grade
all that
would
stuff.
grade your presentation. For
Right.
me, it would be like, okay, you did a great job. You showed your stuff.
Right.
Maybe here are some small things we can work on next time. Right. And that would be the feedback that a teacher would give. It would be like, oh, you got a 84% because you did a great job, but you missed these 2 little points. Right. We're not putting grades on those things. We're just going to then incorporate that feedback into the next thing that we're doing.
Right.
Going outside of the home, outside of what we do in the house. I know a lot of teachers, a lot of parents and homeschoolers, we do have to think about state testing and state requirements.
Right.
So there are a lot of states that do require us to take formalized tests. And this is something that we're going to have to think about and figure out how are we going to teach this? How are we going to get prepared for this? And how do we move forward with our students?
Right. And a lot of times it's not mandatory to take state testing. I would encourage you to look into it if it's not mandatory. If you don't, like for us, it's being offered at our parent partnership. So it's easy. We can just show up and she'll take it.
We're not taking it as information that is required for us. We're doing it as more of I just want to see where she is. I want to see how she does.
Well, and I also want to give her that experience. I want her to have the experience of sitting down in a room and taking a test with other students and, having to focus and all the things that's required because I just think
Daddy had to do this 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, it's just good training. I think it's a good and it's low stakes.
It's very low stakes.
But it does give us an idea. And in this case, it helps our parent partnership to get funding. Yeah. So it's really important for us because we want them to, every student who doesn't take the exam, it counts as a 0. Yeah. So it pulls down the score of the whole school and makes it look like our test scores aren't very high. Yeah. So we definitely want to participate to help the parent partnership, but also I think it's a great experience for them. So if you don't have to take state testing, you might look into it. You might see if you are hesitant to take formal testing like that and go to a testing center and all of that, you could find a practice exam for your state, for example, online that you could print out and you could even give to your student at home. I think they would still have a lot of benefit from taking that and just seeing how they grapple with it. I know when we tried to do it a couple of years ago, before the progressive part kicked in, when she was doing the work that was at her level, it was actually really beneficial to see because she couldn't just turn and ask us, what does this problem mean? How do we do this? Yeah. Right. She was on her own to read it and try to understand it as best she could, and then make a response. And I think there's value in sitting there
independence.
And having to be independent. You can't ask mom or dad. You have to just try to do your best.
And I've been doing this for the last couple of years. Whenever I do some type of what would look like a formal assessment, like a test or something of that nature, I do tell her, I can't help you. This isn't, you're on your own. You have to do this. And so she's had a couple of years of experience now of taking math tests and things like this, where she has to do this thing on her own and she can't, there's no outside help. I'll add, if she has a question about Daddy, I don't understand what this is asking for, I'll reread it for her, but I won't tell her how to do it, but I will help her and that type of stuff. But that's no different than what a teacher would do in a classroom if there's some struggling. But so that's kind of the level that I help her with.
And I think that testing is also really valuable in helping to evaluate the effectiveness of the curriculum you're using or the placement in a new curriculum. So let's say that your child is coming out of a second grade classroom and you're like, okay, are they at second grade reading level? What level of, all about reading or explode the code or something should I do? Whatever program it is you're looking into. Testing can be a really great way to say, here's the right level to start at, or a good way to say, did we master all of the material that we thought we did in the last level before going to the next one? So you can use it that way too. I think it's a nice way to, if you're worried at all about, am I on grade level, those type of questions, testing is a good, it's a piece of that puzzle. It's not the whole picture, but it's a piece.
Super helpful for parents who may only be homeschooling for a short period of time.
Right.
And knowing that their children are going to have to transition back into public school or private school, and keeping that rigor involved is something that you may want to consider. Now, going beyond that, there are some common concerns about testing. I think the first one is the oversight and the state involvement. I know it kind of funny you just said it. Our school at our parent partnership there, I think it's 70% of people don't work with their 60 or 70%, like do not take the test.
No, they don't want to take the test.
They don't want to take the state
because
test.
they're really worried that the state is going to do something with that data.
Yeah.
In our situation, in our state, and every state's different, that nothing happens with the data.
Yeah.
So I think that people are concerned about oversight. Is there going to be scrutiny on this? What if the test score is a certain way? Are they going to come and police how I'm doing my homeschool?
Yeah.
So
do they understand that my student doesn't work well with testing, and that causes, they have anxiety about that and they don't perform well on testing? We understand there are a ton of students who need special accommodations for test taking.
And there's a lot of students in public school that don't test well, right?
Exactly, yeah.
I think it's good to have this practice because as adults there are many adults, and we know several who do not test well, and it's really hindered them in their careers and caused a lot of anxiety because they don't test well. So I think it's probably worth trying to get into a test. If you're worried at all about your state and how they're going to use the data, go to your state's homeschool organization
and ask
on your local Facebook groups for homeschooling families, how does this work with assessments in our state, just to try to alleviate some of your fears. Because I think in general, they're not using these scores to punish anybody. It's usually not the purpose. In Washington State, we just have to do a test. We don't have to even report the results of that test. We just have to assess every year. And we could go to an independent testing center or something to do that if we wanted to.
So that's the fears on the parent side. Let's talk a little bit about the anxiety on the children's side.
Yeah,
obviously,
absolutely.
We kind of mentioned it throughout this episode, but students can also get a ton of anxiety, and we have seen that
So much
firsthand
stress.
in our students. And I've been spending a lot of time working with my daughter in preparation for this exam that's coming up in like 2 months right now.
Right.
Helping her learn how to take tests, helping her understand how to take multiple choice quizzes, improving her ability to read directions for problems, read passages, and be able to analyze those passages and answer the questions. She's been doing a great job at it, and I think she's well prepared to be able to go into a test, read a couple paragraphs of some topic, whatever it might be, and then answer a number of questions on that topic, doing reading comprehension and all that type of stuff. It's just her having the ability now to read, I think has, at this level, has really stripped away, I think, some of the anxiety. But for me, I think anxiety is an issue of confidence. In some respects, going into the test, I think she would be a little anxious about, I don't know if I can do this. What happens if I get stuck? And all those types of things. And so there's a lot of like test taking tips and tools and tricks and tool belt type of things that she may need to learn along the way, or your learner may need to learn how to take these tests without having the anxiety that, I'm going to fail, or it's going to be the end of the world. Preparing her in the proper mindset to go into the test has been a big thing for me. And so, we understand that if we have students going to take these exams, that anxiety can be a huge stressing point, and that's something we don't want to do. Also, and
a lot of parents don't want to put undue stress. Why would I put this stress on my child when they don't have to have the stress, right? I'm sure a lot of people feel that way.
My biggest fear about the test, more than anything, is causing regression.
Yeah.
Right. I don't want her to go into a test for 2 hours, lock up, start crying, come out, and this being a scarring event for her.
Right.
When I have made, when she has made, I want to be clear, she has made the efforts and the growth and in her reading skills. I don't want this event to hurt her in that confidence, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, yes, I've done a lot of work. It is true. I've done a lot of work, but it's her progress and her development that she has really embraced. I don't want to cause a regression. That's been the number one fear for me. And that's been the number one reason for the last 5 months that I have been, not intensively training her, but passively getting her prepared for this.
And we're going to have a whole episode on preparing for testing, so we can get into lots of techniques. But I think that that's a really legitimate fear, that we're going to cause undue anxiety and stress for our kids. Yeah. And you're right, leading to a regression, or, I knew I was terrible at math or whatever it is.
I'm so stupid. And I've heard those before, and it breaks my heart when I hear it.
Right. We don't want anything like that to happen. So you all know your children best, but I think if we can prepare them and we feel it could be reasonably ready. One of the reasons we had this terrible testing experience a couple of years ago was it was a progressive test, but she was also in first grade. So we couldn't explain to her. We tried to explain what a progressive test was and what was going to happen.
Yeah.
She didn't really understand. And so we decided last year at second grade, she still was not ready emotionally to handle that experience.
And reading wise as well. Yeah.
And reading wise, but we just decided like emotionally she wasn't there. So we were going to wait till this year to do any more of that testing. And it turns out this is the first year of actual state testing for our school anyway. So it all works out. But that was just, so for us, that was a real problem. It was like, so, if you're worried about your kids and the stress that they're going to have, really think about what the testing experience is going to be like them, their age, are they ready? What type of test is it? And try to make the best decision you can, whether it's worth what could be some of the costs.
And I know another concern that parents may have is, does this test, whether it's a standard test or some state test, does this really assess that they're learning?
Yeah. And well, that is such a hard thing to answer.
I know.
Because some tests are really poor.
Yeah.
And some tests are they're only testing what you can regurgitate at that exact moment. And so depending on your student and them best, there may be better ways to do testing, right? You may, like you talked about, doing an oral assessment. Maybe that's better. What we ended up encountering a lot with our daughter is because her reading was a bit behind, but her math skills were more advanced. We couldn't accurately test her in math because she couldn't read the prompts. Right? She could do the math, but she couldn't actually read the word problem. Yep. And so we had a lot of mismatch there. So we would make accommodations, right? We would read the word problem to her without any other explanation, but just, it's like scribing for a child that can't write yet.
Yep.
That would be the same thing. So you do have to take a look and I think it's important to say, what am I trying to get out of this test? Am I trying to check a box? Mm-hmm. Am I trying to just give them the experience of taking a test? Am I really trying to assess what I think they're learning? And does the test fit the goal that I have in mind?
Yeah.
Because if it doesn't, if it's mismatched, then we need to adjust what kind of test we're doing and, make a different accommodation. If it's just that you want your child to have an experience taking a test, that's great. You can pretty well achieve that, but you're right. Does it really show what they're learning? I mean, I think not very many tests do a good job of that in general. So math tests are easier, but other tests in reading and things,
it's very subjective in a lot of respects, especially writing. I think that's a challenging one.
Yeah, totally.
So hopefully, this episode today, we've talked a lot about why testing should be used, maybe where you can use it.
Where does it fit in?
Where does it fit into your homeschool? We're not saying that you have to test. No, by no means, do not
absolutely
misread
not.
us on that.
It's not the right thing for everyone, or it's maybe just not the right time or the right type of test.
Yeah,
there's a lot of considerations to make, but there could be value in
There's
it for
no
you.
way that I have a kindergartner right now. Am I doing formal tests with her? Absolutely not.
No.
No way.
But you're
she
saying
will.
things to her like, hey, what would 5 + 7 be?
Yeah.
And she's answering, and that's a small form of an assessment, right? Look, so tons of informal assessments, but I think we aren't doing formal assessments with her yet.
Yeah, exactly. So we're getting in there. So next week we'll talk a little bit more about testing, and we'll continue this series.
We're going to go into test materials.
Perfect.
So if you're preparing for a bigger standardized test or something that you're going to get prepped for, we're going to talk all about different types of materials that you can use, and then we're going to go into how to prepare for the test, and then we're going to go into some test-taking strategies, which, especially if you have an older student who might be getting ready to take a PSAT or something like that, I think the principles of test-taking strategies are really helpful for anyone taking a standardized test. Thanks so much for joining us today and making us a part of your homeschool journey. Please engage with us on social media. Join our Homeschool Together podcast group on Facebook and find us at Homeschool Together Podcast on Instagram. We'd love to hear your feedback, questions, and recommendations. Until next time.
Happy homeschooling!